At 04:17 local time, the Strait of Hormuz looked less like a shipping lane and more like a firing corridor. 2 American destroyers were already inside it. USS Truxtun and USS Mason moved east in tight escort formation around 2 U.S.-flagged tankers carrying nearly 4 million barrels of crude oil through the narrowest maritime chokepoint on Earth. On radar screens inside the combat information centers, the geometry was brutal. 21 nautical miles of constrained water, Iranian coastline to the north, Qeshm Island controlling the inner approach, civilian traffic cluttering the radar picture, hundreds of heat sources, fishing boats, cargo ships, electronic noise. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Iran's anti-ship batteries were already calculating firing solutions. Because this was not a freedom of navigation patrol, this was Operation Project Freedom, the first American attempt to break Iran's 2-month blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And everybody involved understood the same thing. If this convoy failed, global shipping rates would detonate by morning. The countdown had already started before the ships even crossed the entry line. 9 minutes to missile range. Inside Truxtun CIC, the radar picture kept expanding. Spy 1 arrays painted the Gulf in layers of altitude and velocity. Green tracks, amber tracks, unknowns. The operators were not looking for a single attack. They were looking for pattern collapse, the moment ordinary maritime clutter reorganizes into a coordinated kill chain. Then it happened. 6 contacts lifted simultaneously from the Iranian coast. Fast sea skimming bearing south Noor anti-ship cruise missiles. The launch signatures appeared only briefly before they disappeared into the radar horizon, hugging the water at low altitude to reduce detection time. That mattered because at sea level, the curvature of the Earth becomes part of the weapon. A missile flying just meters above the surface can remain invisible until it is dangerously close, like seeing the tip of a spear only after it has already crossed the room. Truxtun's command team had seconds to decide whether this was the main strike or the opening feint, because saturation attacks are designed around hesitation. If you fire too early, you waste interceptors. If you fire too late, ships die. Vampires inbound echoed across internal circuits as the destroyers accelerated and adjusted formation spacing. The tankers drifted slightly south under escort guidance while Aegis fire control solutions updated in real time. The American advantage was not just missiles, it was layered timing. And timing is everything in naval warfare. At roughly 60 nautical miles, the first intercept window opened. SM-2 missiles erupted vertically from Mk-41 launch cells aboard Truxtun and Mason, punching into the dawn sky before rolling hard toward the incoming tracks. The launch itself looked almost slow from outside the ship. Then the boosters ignited fully and the missiles disappeared into altitude like white-hot javelins. The intercept geometry mattered. An SM-2 does not simply chase a target. It creates a collision problem in 3 dimensions, predicting where the missile will be after both objects maneuver at closing speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour combined. Imagine throwing a spear at another spear while both are moving through fog. The first Noor disappeared 23 miles from the convoy, then another, then another. 3 kills. But the radar picture did not clear. It multiplied. New contacts flooded the scope from multiple bearings. Smaller signatures this time, slower, harder to classify against maritime clutter. Shahed 136 drones, and this is where the Iranian strategy started making tactical sense. The cruise missiles were never supposed to sink both destroyers outright. They were supposed to force missile expenditure. Every SM-2 launched from an Arleigh Burke destroyer is one less interceptor available later in the engagement. Naval warfare in confined waters becomes arithmetic very quickly. Iran was trying to bankrupt the shield before the decisive strike arrived. The drones descended in staggered groups, forcing the destroyers to split defensive attention across multiple sectors. SM interceptors launched next, shorter range, more agile missiles designed for terminal defense. Their job was not long-range area denial, their job was emergency surgery. One drone vanished in a fragmentation bloom. Another survived the first intercept attempt and kept coming, then another. The air defense officers aboard Mason faced the exact problem Iran wanted. Too many targets entering too many engagement windows simultaneously. And overhead, another layer of the battle was already unfolding. FCA-18 Super Hornets from the Carrier Air Wing had established combat air patrol west of the convoy. Their mission sounded simple on paper: kill drones before the destroyers waste missiles on them. In reality, it was one of the most dangerous deconfliction environments imaginable, because SM-2 interceptors and American fighters now needed the same airspace at the same time. One mistake in altitude separation, one mistake in radar track, one mistimed turn. Friendly fire becomes possible instantly. This is where most people got the story wrong. The battle was not primarily about whether American ships could shoot missiles down. It was about magazine management. Every engagement decision aboard Truxtun and Mason revolved around conservation. The destroyers carried finite interceptors. Iran possessed cheaper attack systems in larger numbers. A Shahed drone costing tens of thousands of dollars could force the expenditure of a multi-million-dollar interceptor if it penetrated deep enough into the defensive envelope. That exchange ratio becomes catastrophic during prolonged operations, which is why the Super Hornets mattered. The fighters surged lower, using onboard radar and infrared sensors to identify drone tracks beyond the ship's optimal firing geometry. AIM-9X Sidewinders streaked outward in sharp turns, detonating against slow-moving drones before they entered terminal range. It was economically smarter to kill them in the air with aircraft than burn through shipboard missile inventories. But the defensive layers were beginning to compress. A drone survived, then another. The first Phalanx CIWS aboard Mason activated at under 2 miles. The sound barely resembles gunfire. It sounds mechanical, industrial. A 6-barrel 20mm cannon firing thousands of rounds per minute turns into a continuous metallic roar. Tracers reached outward in a solid stream as the autonomous system tracked incoming drones by radar and thermal contrast. One Shahed disintegrated almost instantly. Another crossed through debris and kept coming. At this range, there is no second debate, no strategic discussion, no diplomacy, only reaction time. The drone detonated in the water less than 400 meters from the tanker convoy, throwing spray across the port side and temporarily blinding thermal optics with heat plume and debris. Then the radar operators noticed something worse. 6 fast-moving surface contacts separating from the Iranian coastline. Fast attack boats, small profile, high speed, difficult to target among civilian maritime clutter, and critically, still outside immediate engagement authorization because commercial traffic remained dangerously close to their approach vector. The boats accelerated south before abruptly turning east, disappearing toward coves near Qeshm Island. At first glance, it looked like retreat. It was not retreat. It was repositioning. The first phase of the Iranian attack had failed to stop the convoy, but it had forced the American destroyers to spend missiles, expose defensive patterns, and compress operational timelines. The surviving fast boats were now transitioning to the second layer of the ambush, and the Americans knew exactly what that meant. MANPADs, portable infrared-guided missiles, cheap, concealable, extremely dangerous to helicopters operating near the coastline. The convoy continued eastward under escort, while planners aboard the American task force prepared the next move. Leaving the fast attack boats alive meant accepting continuous harassment attacks against follow-on shipping. But engaging them required entering the Iranian coastal threat envelope. And coastal warfare changes everything. On open ocean, destroyers dominate through range and sensor coverage. Near shore, geography becomes a weapon. Radar reflections bounce unpredictably off terrain. Islands break line of sight. Missile teams relocate through tunnels, roads, and concealed coves. Small boats vanish into fishing traffic. The battle space becomes crowded, compressed, and deeply hostile. The strike package launched anyway. EA-18G Growlers entered first. No bombs, no missiles initially, just electronic attack. Their ALQ-249 jamming systems began saturating Iranian coastal radar networks with interference, false returns, and targeting disruption. Think of it less like turning radar off and more like flooding an enemy command center with thousands of contradictory versions of reality simultaneously. A radar operator might still see something, but he no longer knows what is real. That mattered because the helicopters coming next would be flying low and slow inside MANPAD range. And then came the unexpected platform, A-10 Thunderbolt IIs. For years, critics argued the aircraft belonged to another era. Too slow, too vulnerable, too specialized. Then the mission planners looked at the target set. Dug-in optical anti-aircraft guns hidden near coastal rock formations. Small, hardened positions difficult to hit efficiently with expensive precision weapons. Targets requiring visual confirmation under heavy clutter. Suddenly the A-10 became exactly the right tool. The first strafing run began seconds after Growler jamming degraded Iranian radar coordination. Avenger cannons opened fire in long bursts, 30mm depleted uranium rounds shredding coastal firing points with terrifying precision. The gun does not sound like a machine gun from distance. It sounds like fabric tearing across the sky. Positions that could threaten helicopters disappeared under dust, fragmentation, and collapsing stone. But suppression is not destruction. And everybody knew some launch teams survived. That was the real danger. Do not need radar. They need eyesight and patience. The Apaches crossed the coastline low over the water. AH-64 attack helicopters are built around controlled violence. Sensor mast above the rotor, Hellfire missiles beneath the wings. Chain guns slaved directly to pilot head movement. At low altitude over water, they become hunter-killers optimized for short-range chaos. Behind them, MH-60 Seahawks moved in support roles, scanning for surviving fast boats among coves and inlets around Qeshm Island. Then the infrared warning systems lit up. Missile launch. One of the surviving IRGC teams had waited until the helicopters committed deeper into the cove system before firing a MASOG-2 MANPAD at near point-blank range. This is the terrifying thing about infrared-guided missiles at short range. The target often sees the launch too late. The Apache crew had seconds, literally seconds. The helicopter's common missile warning system detected the launch plume instantly, while the ALQ-1 and 44 infrared jammer activated simultaneously, flooding the seeker with pulsing infrared confusion designed to break lock. Flares erupted outward in sharp bursts behind the aircraft. For a moment, the entire engagement compressed into pure physics: heat signatures, seeker lodging your velocity, countermeasure timing. The missile curved hard toward the decoys, missed. The Apache survived by a margin measured in meters. And now the Americans knew exactly where the launch team was. Hellfire missiles followed almost immediately. The cove detonated in overlapping explosions as secondary ammunition cooked off among the hidden boats. Fuel ignited across the shoreline. One fast attack craft rolled partially onto its side before burning through the hull, but even then the operation was not clean. Because hidden inside the geography of the strait was the deeper problem nobody could solve quickly. Iran did not need to win the engagement tactically. It only needed to prove the strait remained dangerous enough to disrupt shipping confidence. That is the strategic heart of the entire crisis. Insurance markets do not care who technically wins individual firefights. Commercial carriers care about survivability, predictability, and risk exposure. One damaged tanker can ripple through global energy pricing within hours. One successful strike can change routing calculations for entire fleets. And the world was watching this battle in real time. Oil futures surged during the first reports of missile launches before stabilizing as confirmation arrived that the convoy remained intact. Shipping firms delayed departures waiting for battle damage assessments. Regional airspace restrictions expanded across the Gulf. Every hour of uncertainty multiplied economic pressure globally. Meanwhile, inside the American command structure, another calculation was emerging: magazine depletion. The destroyers had survived the opening saturation attack, but interceptor inventories had fallen sharply. Replacement missiles cannot be teleported into launch cells during active operations. Reloading vertical launch systems at sea is extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming under combat conditions, which meant Operation Project Freedom had revealed both American strength and American vulnerability simultaneously. The United States could force a convoy through the strait, but sustaining continuous operations against repeated saturation attacks was another matter entirely, and Iran understood that. This was never designed as a single decisive naval battle. It was designed as exhaustion warfare: cheap drones against expensive interceptors, small boats against billion-dollar destroyers, geography against logistics, persistence against inventories. The battlefield looked modern on camera, but the logic underneath it was ancient. Force the stronger power to spend faster than it can replenish. Yet something catastrophic had still happened for Iran during those opening hours. Because the blockade's core assumption collapsed the moment the convoy survived transit. Deterrence only works if the threat appears uncontrollable. Once commercial shipping sees escorted tankers physically crossing the strait under protection, the psychological monopoly breaks. Not completely, not immediately, but enough to matter. Enough for insurers, energy traders, and allied governments to begin recalculating risk instead of accepting paralysis. And militarily, Iran had exposed key operational methods during the attack: launch locations, drone sequencing, fast boat staging areas, radar dependencies, MANPAD deployment zones, electronic signatures. Every engagement teaches both sides something, and the side forced to reveal more loses future ambiguity. American ISR platforms were already recording everything. Every radar emission became data. Every missile launch became trajectory analysis. Every surviving Iranian firing point became tomorrow's target folder. That is the hidden cost of failed saturation attacks. You spend not only munitions, but secrecy. By nightfall, the strait remained contested, but the first convoy had passed. Damaged debris floated near shipping lanes north of Qeshm Island. Burn scars marked the coves where ERG boats had attempted to regroup. American helicopters returned with heat scoring and shrapnel damage. Destroyer crews began immediate rearm calculations while planners rushed additional escorts toward the Gulf. Nobody inside the operation believed the crisis was over. If anything, they understood it was entering a more dangerous phase, because now both sides had crossed the line from deterrence into active operational adaptation. Iran had learned how aggressively the United States would defend convoy lanes. The United States had learned exactly how layered and persistent Iranian coastal saturation tactics could become, and the strait itself remained what it had always been, a geographic pressure valve capable of shaking the global economy with every missile launch and every insurance warning. But strategically, the opening day delivered a verdict neither side could fully hide. Iran could threaten the strait, it could bloody it, it could slow it. But closing it completely against a determined multinational naval response was a far more difficult equation than the blockade's architects had promised, especially once the world's largest navy adapted its defensive layers around the problem. Because that is what really unfolded during Operation Project Freedom. Not a cinematic duel between single ships and missiles. A contest between industrial capacity, interceptor economics, radar tree, pilot endurance, and the brutal mathematics of sustained maritime warfare inside one of the narrowest energy corridors on Earth. And the terrifying part is how quickly those equations can escalate. One failed intercept, one tanker hit, one helicopter lost inside a cove, one destroyer forced offline. That is all it takes for the entire balance to shift again. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. But on May 4, 2026, it became the center of the global economy, the front line of modern missile warfare, and the clearest demonstration yet that future naval battles may not be decided by who has the biggest fleet, but by who runs out of missiles first. If you want more tactical breakdowns like this, subscribe now.